perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, I hope everybody can still hear me. First of all, hello everybody, and thank you very much for coming. My name is Sandra Shaw. I'm chairing the IEEE student branch, and on the side I'm also doing a PhD in the ORC. But first of all, I would like to thank Yvette and Rebecca for organizing this event together in the IEEE student branch. This is the marketing team of the ORC, and I'd like to give a bit of applause. Without them, you might not have heard of the event, and you will definitely not have any pizza later, so thank you. Just wanted to mention at the beginning, we do take some pictures, and if you're not happy with that, please do let us know now, and then we'll make sure that you're not in there. That seems to be the case. Good. It's not all undergrads in the audience, just to give you a heads up. We've got a couple of PhD students from different schools. We also got some admission tutors as well. So this is just to, afterwards when you have pizza, so you can actually have a conversation with them without being, on front on the panel, and just chat with them to see how it actually is to do a PhD and what they really think it is to do a PhD. This is a cross-department event, so it's run with ECS, Physics, and the ORC. And yeah, well, I guess we start now. Thank you very much all for coming. I would now like to introduce our panel. That's it. There you go, stand a bit further. So we've got Nick Evans here, who is a professor in physics. He's also the head of grad school for the faculty. We've got Matthew, who is a senior researcher in the ORC. He's going to give a talk, a myth-busting talk actually about PhDs in general. And then we've got Bill Brocklesby, an associate ORC professor. We've got Paolo, who is a professor in the ECS. And then we'll come to our students. It's Angela from, she's a third-year student actually from physics. We've got a first-year student from the ORC, who's Eliza, and then a second-year, Raphael. So thank you very much for coming. So when we set up the event, we thought about, well, who actually has a PhD that you probably know? So we were quite surprised. Kermit the Frog has a PhD. Who would have thought? And what I think is quite funny, he has got a PhD from the University of Southampton. So it's Southampton in the US, but it's still Southampton. So we kind of did a little bit of more research and had a look who else has got a PhD that you probably wouldn't think about. So one person is Mike Tyson. Not the first person who comes into your mind when you think about PhDs, right? Another one is Orlando Bloom. Now, what you probably spotted here, Orlando Bloom has a much funnier hat than Mike Tyson. This is because he got a PhD from a UK university, so be careful which country you choose for a PhD. And he has one from the US, just to give you a heads up. We'll see another example in a minute. So that's Jeremy Clarkson. He got a PhD as well. He was a bit more unlucky during the graduation ceremony though, because he got a cake thrown into his face. But let's just forget about this now. And then it's Bill Gates has a PhD as well. So he quit university actually to set up his own business. Was quite successful. Therefore, a couple of years later, he received an honorary degree. Yeah, so these people all got honorary degrees, and they didn't really work into to get this PhD, which is something that you might have to do if you actually do a PhD. But well, you probably don't need to work as much as you think you have to. And this one I want to hand over to Matthew, who will give you some ideas of what you have to do and you don't have to do when you do a PhD.
I'll spend 5 minutes wiring myself up. Yes, so hello, my name's Matthew Budge. As I've introduced, I'm a senior research fellow here at Southampton. I did my PhD up at Cranfield University about 7 or 8 years ago now, a bit more than that. And I also run a blog and a webcomic called Errant Science, which some of you may have seen cartoons from. And I've had quite a few students, PhD students to supervise, and I liaise with a lot of people and a lot of students, both as they're going through PhD and after PhD, through my work, trying to help people understand outreach and how to do outreach. And what this talk is all about is really to try and make the audience in general relax, because we've got a big panel session to do in a minute. We need you to ask questions. And audiences don't generally do that if you want, chilled out. But also to try and kind of preemptively answer some of the most common myths about PhDs. So I'm going to try and explain a little bit about PhD. PhDs kind of vary in exact length and context a little bit, depending on where you're sort of studying them, so I'll be very broad about that. And then I'll go through some of the common myths, as I said. And then lastly, I'm going to try and entertain my children for the next 20 minutes, because they're sitting really patiently in the corner over there. I think mostly the entertainment's being done by My Little Pony and Fortnite, but it's close enough. If they're still sat there at the end of 20 minutes, I've succeeded. So the first thing with a PhD is what a PhD is. So a PhD is really all about knowledge. It's about sort of where that knowledge fits. So you saw this from the poster, this sort of like huge kind of sort of large sort of pie for human knowledge, and then the things that you know is really just a small part of that. And really specifically, a PhD is the part that you add to human knowledge. It's the bit that you do that no one else did. It's a contribution to knowledge, a PhD. That's kind of at its core, whether you're doing a PhD in physics or doing a PhD in art history, it's a contribution to knowledge and to human understanding. And at the end of your PhD, at the end of those 3-4 years, that's the one thing that you're hoping to achieve. You're not doing something that somebody else has already done, proven, tested, and understood. You're doing something that no one has done, no one understands. Because at the end, if it turns out you've just done the same thing as everybody else, you've not contributed anything. That's just kind of an MSc. A PhD is you are adding to the wealth of human knowledge. And in general, it takes about 3 years. It's a 3-year program normally. So you first year, second year, third year, and then sometimes the sort of writing up periods and various degree funding structures have different lengths. But typically it's about 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, you get a book, which unfortunately you have to write. But broadly speaking, it's you do work for 3 years and then you write a book. That is as broadly as possible a PhD. The rest is just details, really. So there's a lot more obviously about that on all of the websites that Southampton offers, and various PhD adverts will have their own particular flavours of what's included in terms of training and all sorts of other things. But this is it. This is a PhD. You add stuff to human knowledge for about 3 years, and you write a book at the end. There you go. That's a PhD. Nicely summed up. I hope you want to do one now. Who doesn't want to write a book? But some of the things that prevent people doing PhDs aren't just the fear of writing. People also are kind of scared of all the other things you see in the media. There are loads of different kind of memes and comic books and all sorts of things about how terrible PhDs are and scary they are. And it's not all like that. Sometimes, funny jokes are often quite funny when it's something about people being overworked, but actually that's not always true in PhDs. So to try and help with this, I asked the readers of my website, Aaron Science, what are the PhD myths? And I got a kind of a large number of responses from PhD students all over the world, in sort of America, Africa, Asia, the UK, and they all wrote back with about sort of 30 or 40 different myths, but they all fitted under the same fused categories. So I've kind of whittled it down to just a few of the key myths that you hear in the media time and time again. So one of which was you have to be a genius to do a PhD. So this you see like loads in TV shows, be it The Big Bang Theory, and every movie ever where you have a scientist who's trying to stop people destroying the world. They're always super geniuses. And they always are essentially just like the new reincarnation of Einstein. That's just not true. A PhD is about more than having some sort of genius spark. It doesn't even require a genius spark. If every PhD required us all to sort of be staring off into the middle distance and have a brainwave about reversing the polarity of something, then PhDs would kind of work really differently to the way that they do. So PhDs and sort of how it's portrayed do all sorts of things to mess up with people and going into them. People sort of get held back because they think that they're not movie clever, and that's not something you should do. If you're diligent and hardworking, and if you've got to the point where you're doing a master's or you're in a late stage BSc at Southampton and your grades are looking great, you will probably be brilliant at a PhD. You don't have to think of ways of solving cold fusion. It's just not something. And one of the people who wrote on the comments summed it up kind of better than I did, is that even when you get a PhD, having a PhD doesn't make you sort of clever. It's just an indicator that you are good at executing a research project and generating new knowledge. That's what it tells you. So getting one doesn't make you a genius, and you don't need to be a genius to get one. And that is definitely a trope that you see way too much. The next one is you just do what you're told for 3 years. Being a PhD is just a glorified researcher. You do what your supervisor tells you, and if you do what your supervisor tells you, at the end of it, you again write the book that the supervisor tells you to write, and you get a degree. And lots of people sort of interpret this sometimes differently, not only just that they're told what to do and they'll get a degree, but also that you'll be they'll hold your hand all the way through the process. And that's just not it either. I mean, people want, in some cases, this. They want all of it written and just to put their name in. And in reality, almost all PhDs start with a small post-it note with thesis titles. And that post-it note gets longer and longer for 3 years, and you're the one who then has to do everything around that. And that sounds like a sort of terribly scary thing, because, oh my God, you have to do all this work. But actually, it's your time to slowly develop yourself as a researcher, and that over 3 years, it's not that you start on day one and you're abandoned. What happens here and what happens everywhere else is that you're looked after and you're sort of shown how to do things, you're starting out on training and things that sort of lead you towards the new research part of your degree. And that's where you start to get to your 3rd year, and that's when you're doing things that are truly new in your 3rd year. And so it's something that you drive and that you sort of start to direct and move in the way that you want to do it. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The penultimate one is that you have to work an insane number of hours every day. And there are some students who do this, and that's not a good way of working at all. But going into PhDs is something people very much seem to expect, that they'll suddenly have to work until midnight every night in order to crunch those deadlines and to get your PhD. And generally speaking, if you talk to a lot of people, we could have used a poll system, but often this is sort of like the timeline of a PhD over 3 years. They just kind of feel that the longer it gets into a PhD, the more stressed you get and the more hours you have to do, and it's just crazy, crazy, crazy. For a start, this isn't even reality for most people. I've known plenty of students who it looks more like this, where they kind of do a little bit at the beginning, they kind of just skip the middle, and then they do some stuff at the end for the best. Don't do that. That's really, really, really terrible idea. If you do that, you're going to be very, very stressed at the end. Don't do that. But also, don't do this, because that's crazy too. This is how a PhD works. It works like a normal job. It works like any job. You work 9 to 5, you come in and do the hours, and then sometimes you've got a long experiment where you have to stay, until 2 in the morning to finish it. That's going to happen a couple of times. And at the end, you might have to do a late night because you've got, Word, you moved a document in, you moved an image in Word, and now you have to rewrite the whole thing. So it shouldn't be a kind of crazy up-down hill of ridiculous hours. It should be a steady research job as you develop yourself and start to understand that you have to come in the morning, you work with a team, you go home at night and you leave it at work, and you come in the next day and get back to it. And PhDs work so much better for any student who does them like this, so much better. And the last myth is that PhDs are the same for everything. That if you do a PhD, your PhD experience is going to be like the person sitting next to you, and it's just nowhere near true. Everybody's PhD experience is different because a PhD is built on lots of different working pieces, from the place you're doing it, your supervisor, the project, the people you work with, whether or not the company that you're working with goes bankrupt halfway through, little details, but it's things that make PhDs change and make them different. And so progress for lots of people is so complicated and confusing, and again, going back to tropes in movies, it's not that genius moment. You don't suddenly solve your problem in one step. You solve your problem through lots and lots of steps, often with input from other people and discussions and all sorts of other things that go towards making that kind of PhD sort of work for you, and work for your supervisor, and work for people that you're working with. So I hope that you've sort of seen from some of this, sort of very brief introduction, that PhDs aren't sort of these sort of terrifying things. They're more about you learning to become a researcher and you learning how research works, whether or not it's research to go on and be an academic, or whether it's to go and be a researcher for a big company or even a small company. It should still be about developing you as a researcher. And they should be about learning for the first time to take science further than you've done it before. Before now, you've been studying what other people have done in science, and it's about that tiny little bit in your third year where you add something, your contribution to knowledge. And that you don't have to be a genius to do that contribution. You have to work hard, and you have to work well with the team, you have to listen to people, find something that engages with you. And hopefully, you can do that flexibly, something that suits you, something that works well with you, and something that suits with the whole way you do your job. So you don't just do your job, you have a life, and you do the right hours and things like that. And I'm sure all of the sort of the panelists in the Q&A have all had different PhD experiences. They've all gone through and seen various versions of these myths, and I'm sure they can answer all sorts of other myths you might have heard. So I hope this is kind of a nice introduction. I think that we're now going to, well, I'll pass back, and then I think we're going to go to the panel, and you can ask us lots of questions about all of this. So.
Thank you very much. So, I'm just going to start off with the first question for everybody, just to start off with a question. It's most of the time a bit challenging one. And I recommend just going through, starting with PhD students. Can you just very briefly tell us in one or two sentences about your career path that you've been doing, and in a very understandable way, what you are currently working on? Thank you.
Hello everyone. To do one sentence here. So I finished my degree. I started working for 1 year, then I came for my master, and then continued with my PhD. At the moment, I'm doing the PhD in electronics, and I'm doing research for to helping people with neurological disorders.
Hi, I'm Eliza. I studied electronic engineering with nanotech here and got my bachelor's degree. I then started a master's course, decided that I didn't like my master's course, did a short internship with the ORC where I met my current supervisor, and the rest is history. I'm now 9 months into a PhD trying to make sensors out of optical fibers.
Hi, I'm Angela. I got my master's degree in chemistry, actually, and then I enrolled for a PhD. I found this position advertised, and I liked the project, so I just decided to apply, and I got the offer. And my project is basically about the assembly of three-dimensional dynamic materials made by nanoparticles and biological molecules.
Am I supposed to answer?
Yeah.
I started as a master's student in computer science. I did my dissertation in a strange area called systems and control, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I developed mathematical models for systems, physical, engineering-wise, sometimes from data.
Okay, so I did a bachelor's degree in physics, and at the very end of it was entranced by lasers, and decided very late to do a PhD in lasers as well. Worked for a couple of years in the industry, and I've been teaching lasers to the physics department ever since.
I'll just quickly add my career, I guess, after all that. So I did a BSc in biochemistry, and then worked in developing cancer sensors, and then decided I could develop fibre optic cancer sensors, and then found myself in physics and the ORC somehow. I don't know how. I think the hiring policy needs looking at.
Hi, I'm Nick. So I guess I'm here representing Blue Skies Research. So I've been a physicist most of my life. I'm now a particle physicist. I did my degrees in the UK, then I spent 5 years working in America as a postdoc before coming back here on a UK government fellowship, and somewhere in there they made me permanent. I've been stuck here ever since. So what do I do? Well, you know we found that Higgs boson thing? Well, I think you can probably break it in half, and I want to know what the two halves are. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the audience? Not yet. Here we go. Perfect. Do you want? Can I throw this?
How hard is it to find a funding or to fund a PhD? Because I heard that it looks a little bit scary because it's not uniform, right? It's different for every PhD, sort of. So how hard is it to find funding?
Who wants to answer this?
Well, it is subject dependent, and typically the more obscure, and you know, if you're on department of physics or astronomy or something like that, the government is slightly less interested in people who want to do that than they are in people who want to build kit that they think is going to be useful for the economy. So, you know, there is a graduation in the amount of funding that's available. On the other hand, if you really want to do it, I think you can get into almost any subject.
Maybe I can comment on that?
Do you want to shout as well?
I can just shout. So generally, it's for many positions, it's not your problem to find funding. Your supervisor will have to fund it. So we are busy attracting the funding, and then we offer PhD positions. So it's not like we ask you to go out and find £100,000 in general. We are trying to find £100,000 ourselves. But that depends. Some projects will have money, others it's more difficult.
So that's one of our admission tutors. He's from the ORC. We've got another one from ECS here as well. Do you want to say something about the funding in ECS, or do you agree? Do you have industrial funding as well with the ECS?
Yes, so PhD studentships are funded in a variety of different ways, often from several sources, but it tends to be the supervisor that arranges that. And yeah, then either puts up an advert for a funded PhD studentship, or it could go the other way and you speak to a supervisor about a project and then they go and try to find funding for you for that project, or a mixture of the two. So funding is a complicated subject, but by discussing what you want to do with a potential supervisor, that would be one way of deciding how you're going to fund your PhD.
And that's, I think, a very important point, that if you want to do a project, if you're interested in a specific project, find the person who's doing it and try to see if they have funding available.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. You have a huge resource as an undergraduate student here, which is all the academics on campus. You can go and talk to them. You might need to send them an email first to tell them you're coming. But, you know, find someone who's doing what you want to do and go and talk to them about where the places that do it are, what the funding's like, and so on.
And if you want to see an example PhD advert, we have an open position. So, you know, just Google fiber optic sensors, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that's true for all the schools. So everybody has advertisements. It's always good to just flick through and see what they have. We had another question around here. Right here.
I'll shout as well.
Perfect, thank you.
So, most of you mentioned getting a master's degree. How common or uncommon is to get integrated PhD straight after a bachelor's? Is it hard to get into one?
By integrated PhD, do you mean a master's and a PhD together, so a 4 or 5 year course? So as far as I know, they are offered by specific centres within this university or others, which have funding to offer that kind of studentship. We have a few here. I know that we've got one on websites. Any others? But I've not heard of any for
question.
I could just also add that, so I did a bachelor's degree, and then I worked in industry for 5 years and did a PhD. I don't have a master's. And when I applied for the PhD, my time in industry was taken into consideration as relevant research experience that they felt was worth capturing and worth including as part of my contribution towards the admissions to PhD. So in some cases, sort of you can take into other considerations as well, but that's just an example, my personal example. So.
Thank you very much. Yes.
So this is aimed at the whole panel, but kind of more the current students. But what are some of the skills that you've either helped to develop or learned as part of this PhD that perhaps you hadn't thought you would gain going into it beforehand?
So there is one specific that I didn't think that I would ever develop, and is holding my temper. And I didn't think a PhD would have that, but it really did, because in many situations you find yourself wanting to say out loud what you're thinking, and you can't. Well, you can, but in a nicer way. So that's something that I didn't expect I was going to learn, apart from, I don't know, a variety of soft skills. I thought that PhD was mostly about learning additional technical skills. Turned out it wasn't. And, well, of course, I learned something technical. I can do something more in the lab that I wasn't able 3 years ago. But I learned, for instance, how to communicate my research, because it's I found out it is a very important bit of your PhD. Not only, well, of course, in conferences, and that's nice because you also get to travel and stuff like that, but also in other contexts within the university itself, and other soft skills, I would say, like time management. So as you were mentioning at the beginning, you have more flexibility than what you thought. And if you're not good in managing your own time, you end up with a big red bit at the end of your PhD, in which you don't want to find yourself. I'm a bit in that red bit, but not really much.
I agree. So the technical skills you kind of expect to develop, but if you're going into industry with engineering or physics, then you'll be expecting to develop technical skills as well. The thing which a PhD gives you, which perhaps industry not so much, is the soft skills, the time management, but also the admin skills that you get when you're doing project management. In industry, almost everything is done for you. You only see the little bit of technical work you're currently working on. Whereas for a PhD, you have to manage the whole project, buying in all your supplies, communicating to people, as Angela has mentioned. So I think that's what I've learned I didn't expect.
Well, to complement a little bit what Angela said, I think one thing I learned that I wasn't expecting is emotional stability. Because PhD is trying to do something that no one else have done. So most of the time it's like a roller coaster. You have great moments, yes, I'm awesome, I'm the king of the hill. Then you have really bad moments like, oh, this is not working, maybe I'm wrong, everything is bad. And all of this happened in the same week. So you have to be a little careful and try to control yourself and understand that it's part of the process, it will happen, but eventually you will get there. So that's one thing I wasn't expecting. And the other one will be collaborating with other people. I always believe that PhD will be my research, I will do my work myself and go straight forward with it. But actually, you need to collaborate with other people. If you try to do the thing by yourself, you will find a lot of troubles. And yeah, so somehow you need to learn how to collaborate with other people.
Thank you. There was another question, yeah?
If you took a year out after UMass before you apply for a PhD, how does taking a year out of study affect trying to apply for a PhD?
Is that something the panel can answer? When you take a year out, is that an issue, or can you?
Well, it does depend what you do to a degree. I mean, you know, people are looking for enthusiasm for the subject, so if you've gone off to do something completely different because you couldn't stand it, then that probably doesn't help. I mean, we interview, so we will ask questions to check that you haven't forgotten everything that you learned. But on the other hand, some people go away and go into industry, or they might just go and have an interesting experience, which actually makes them come back more determined to do what they want to do, and more grown up about problem solving on their own and so on. So it can be an advantage, and you should just portray it in that way, and not just as dossing off and holiday.
But it's worth noting, I think, that some of the, if you're looking at a particular project that you want to do, it's very likely that's part of somebody's bigger group project, and that project needs doing right then. And so it's quite possible that a particular project, maybe you couldn't say, okay, I'll take that project, but I'll leave it for a year. Because that's part of, say, a group's program, and so the group wants to do that right then. So it's not necessarily the case that you could, like you would an undergraduate, accept something and then say, I'll never go away from that. Not so much.
Thank you.
Yes, please. If you were to undertake like a part-time PhD, how does that work? Do you come in half the time and then, or how is it structured?
Are you familiar with that? Are there admission tutors?
Certainly from my experience, when I've had a part-time PhD student in the past, it was something we worked out with them as an individual and how it fitted in with the wider project. There's a sort of a give and take between what is kind of perhaps required and what that individual needs as their personal circumstances, really. So it can vary a lot, but the student that I had, we did a 50-50 split, and often it was sort of 2 days a week, and then they'd kind of up it and do some long weeks or something like that to try and make up the different times. But again, it was very individual to them and what they needed to have the sort of the cover for. So I think it's something that you need to discuss and work out really with the sort of people who are running the project.
Yes, I've heard of real extremes. I've heard of people who basically work for 6 months and then do something else for 6 months, and people who are in there half the day. So it's quite flexible as to how you set it up.
This one from
Oh, sorry.
looking at funding issues. Sometimes most of the funding are for 3 years, and then if maybe somebody will be on 3 years, how is it going to be in terms of especially tuition fees? And who's going to be liable for that?
Okay. Yeah. Well, do you want to?
Well, as far as I know, for the tuition fees, after the third year, you can become nominal, which means you have finished your experiments and you will focus on writing your thesis. So when you become nominal, you don't have to pay the tuition fees. It's a little bit tricky here because most of the time, the funding you spend your living, the money for you, it runs out after 3 years. So most of the people, well, what I heard from other students is that after the third year, you become nominal, you pay the tuition fees, and then you start writing your thesis and also working at the same time in your thesis in parallel. That's what I heard most of the people do. Well, I'm not sure if it's the best option.
There is a degree of choice in this, right, which is smart students write up as they go along, and you get to the end of 3 years and you're pretty much done. Okay, and I should also add that there are some courses funded for 3 years, some for 3.5, which is where the university as a whole is aiming for, and there are even some courses that are funded for 4 or more years. So, the hope from the academic side is that you would actually finish in the funded period, although we recognise nobody.
It's not a question, but I think it's sharing some thoughts. I think don't do a PhD for money. It won't make you rich, definitely. So think about that. It's very small chances where you might make up lots of money, but not all the time. The second thing you need to be thinking about
does it get you off the bed at 6 o'clock in the morning or not? So think about the project you do. If it's something you just want to fancy doing, or something that really makes you hot, or you really want it to. That is a key differentiator, because most of the cases, according to my experience, you may not like, the work environment for whatever reason, but that's not the subject of discussing that. But the key differentiator here, the PhD won't make you look a very hard job, and most of it's psychological pressure. So if you're not prepared to take that, you need to be thinking what lifestyle you want to have. Maybe a good job, maybe give you the lifestyle you wanted. Or maybe the PhD is yours. You really need to think. It's only you can decide. No one else.
I would like to turn this actually into a question for the panel. Why did you do a PhD, and would you do it again? Anyone?
Happy to start there. Well, so I did a PhD because I love particle physics. I always have. I want to know why the ultimate question has the answer of 42, and this is what I spend my time thinking about. Yes, in a sense, I couldn't not. What was the second bit of it? Why?
Would you do it again?
Would I do it again? Yes, I'd do it again. So the only thing that I would caveat it with, but I don't think I really need to in this room actually, is that I did think quite carefully that sure, I wanted to do something I love, but I also wanted something where if I didn't get lucky, which in a sense you have to do to end up with an academic job, was there a good career beyond it? And my answer to that is that anything in the mathematical sciences, you have a huge amount of opportunity beyond the PhD. If you're mathematically literate, there are companies out there who are just desperate for you. So doing these degrees does actually also give you a little bit more opportunity at wealth as well, because companies do want people with these skills.
Thank you.
I was in industry when I decided to do a PhD, and I did it for career reasons in industry. I saw that there was a proper ceiling on my career. I was flatly told by some companies that they only employed above a certain level for people with PhDs. There's so much wrong with that hiring policy, but it was, and it still maintains at some companies, that is their hiring policy. So in my field at the time, that was my career limiting point, was that I wasn't going to get much further without a PhD. So my intention was to go into academia, do the PhD, go back out into industry and enjoy a long and happy industry career. But actually, I've really loved being in academia, and I really enjoy quite the pure end of research, which lots of applicable stuff as well. But it's just I really love it, so I could have converted to full academic from mine. And yes, I would absolutely do it again. I really enjoyed the whole experience. So,
Thank you very much.
I think about the time I was looking at a potential PhD, I got a job in industry lined up, and looking at that. And looking at the kind of thing I would be essentially told to do when doing that, and then comparing that to the idea of PhD where, at least in some areas, there's much more freedom to try and do what you want. That was really attractive at the time. And I think since I came across exactly the same thing I was just talking about. But I was told by the folks in the industry, in the job I'd lined up, that it wouldn't be a problem at all having a PhD, and then while I was doing my PhD I found out that it was completely a problem, and they needed me to have a PhD to get in.
As for me, there was no plan. Just like most of the events in my life. There was a position, I applied, not particularly interested, and then I got swept up by my supervisor, who was a fantastic person, and I enjoyed it greatly. I learned many things. I would say, adding to what they have already said, one of the beautiful things about doing a PhD is you realize there's nothing wrong with being ignorant, and it's a very liberating experience to see people who have devoted all their lives about a very specific field, asking questions to themselves and other people, not agreeing on things that you think, I've read it in a textbook, it must be true. Yeah? So it's a very positive experience, I would say, for them. Would I do it again? Absolutely yes. I think I am a better person because I did a PhD. It's a very nice experience. In a world where superficiality, generality is prized, yeah, you have the opportunity, if you're lucky, to work with a person that will teach you a trade in a very noble sense, yeah, in the sense of a carpenter or a violin maker or a physicist, yeah, and that is something that you don't have in the world in general.
For me,
Oh,
so at some point in my life, like actually at the beginning of my bachelor, I started thinking what I am good at. The answer was mostly nothing practical, but I'm good at learning. That's if you ask me which is your skill, I would answer this one. And I thought, how can I make learning my job? I don't know, it turns out that a PhD is a good starting point because, yeah, this is what you actually do. It's not only that you learn, of course, you learn every day and you find every day a ton of stuff you don't know and you will probably never know because it's just too much for one single person to know. But this is what really attracted me about the PhD and about what I'm going to do next, which at the beginning of my PhD thought was academia. Now, I don't know, ask me like after I submit my thesis. But yes, I would definitely do it again, despite all the up and downs and the emotional roller coaster that Rafa was mentioned. It's absolutely true. But now I am at the point of my PhD, I see the end, so I can say yes, I would do it again.
I'm not yet at the point of my PhD where I can see the end, but I'm also not at the point where everything is very, very stressful. So yeah, no, I absolutely would do it again. I spent a little bit of time working in industry before starting my PhD, and though I really enjoyed having a nice 9-to-5 job and then leaving work and it stopping existing and not having to think about it in my free time, seeing only a very, very small part of the project which you're working on and working in this company where hundreds of people are all working towards the same goal and you have no idea what that end goal is a little bit disheartening. You feel very removed from the goal that you're trying to achieve. You're doing things because you're told to do it rather than having a real understanding and motivation. And a PhD is completely different to that. You're deciding your own direction because you want to achieve something specific or because your team's looking to achieve something quite specific. And so for me, that's a much easier and better way for me to feel motivated about the work I'm doing, is to be able to see a project through from the idea right through to the finished, the final result.
Well, in my experience, I didn't know if I was going to do a PhD. Well, I did my master's here. So when I finished my project for the master, my supervisor told me the opportunities that he had for the PhD. He told me about the project, and I really wanted it. I really liked it. I was really interested about it. So when I started thinking about it, like, should I do it or not, I started making a list of pros and cons. And well, opposite to what someone said here, a PhD, he needed a PhD to continue developing his career. In my case, I hear from other people that even having a PhD title won't help you find a better job. So, so even if I have a PhD, it's not guaranteed I will find a better job or something like that. Some companies don't care for a PhD. So that was a con. Maybe I was not going to make enough, as much money as working in industry, which was another con. So besides, everything pointed to be a bad option. But still, I like it. When I hear the project, it was really nice. I really liked it. So besides all of that, I take a leap of faith and go for the project. And yeah, here I am. Will do it again? Yes, I will do it again. As everyone says, it's a really nice experience. It's a unique experience, even though the difficulties and everything, it's really nice and definitely worth it.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions? Yes, please.
What can I expect of the PhD interview, and how would I prepare for it to not fail?
Admission tutors want to answer that, because I think they have a bit more of an experience probably with interviews.
I'd say it really does depend on who your interviewer is, about what interests them in terms of judging whether you're going to be a successful PhD student or not. I guess enthusiasm for the subject is an important thing that they want to see, and whether you've done some background reading on that particular subject, so you had some knowledge in that area that you wanted to study in. But yeah, I think in the same way that you prepare for a job interview by researching the area, researching the topic that your supervisor is working in, that's the sort of preparation you do for a PhD interview. I don't know if I have anything else to.
Yeah, I think one thing we're also looking for in your answers is we want to see that curiosity that you need to do a PhD. So we may ask you what was your final year project, and all students are always able to explain that to some degree. But why did you do that? Why is that interesting? Did you only do what your supervisor told you to do? If there's anything you can give us where we say, yes, this person is really interested actually, it's a subject that is interesting to the student and he goes out of his way to read something or do something, that really makes us think, yeah, this will be a very good PhD student.
So the thing that my group does is that what we don't like is those people who study whatever and then they do the exam and then they forget it. So we like to take people back to earlier in their degree and just talk about a subject, Maxwell's equations. Can you write Maxwell's equations down? You'd be surprised there are some people who just go, that's the second year, I don't know that anymore. Yeah, and that's not the person we're looking for. The person we're looking for, and we don't expect people just to be able to immediately give us a lecture on them, but to start to be able to discuss about it and see that you can interact with the person in the way that you do when you're doing a PhD project, which is you don't understand something completely, you want to talk about it at the board. Can you make progress? So, yeah, so tutorials in a sense are quite a good sort of way of thinking about how you
Do we have a final question? Yes, please.
So, even though you may not be personally responsible,
I'm just going to give you the microphone. Right to here in the back. Thank you.
So, even though you may not be personally responsible for finding funding, how much does budgeting factor into your tasks?
I think that will probably depend a lot on the research group which you're working with and how much funding there is around the area in which you're working. Is that fair? I know that some groups, some PhD students have to think about it a lot more because they might not have other pools of money that they can tap into. Every PhD student, when you start in Southampton or in the OLC at least, is given kind of a pool of money to put towards resources, to put towards spending time using equipment and in the clean rooms and things like that. And it depends how well your project is going and how worthwhile your supervisor thinks is as to whether or not there's any possibility to top that up. But it's quite a lot of money and you're not likely to get to the bottom of it unless you're doing something really major and really exciting. 3 years is probably...
Well, I'm not entirely sure how much money I have left, because we don't directly manage our own money. Well, at least that's for me. If I need something, like for my experiment or stuff like that, at least for my experience, it's very difficult that I go to my supervisor and I'm like, can you buy me this? Like, yeah, sure. And normally it's like, why do you need this? Are you sure you really need this one? So that's also another skill you actually learn. You have to pitch your own project. You know, like, yes, I need this because of that reason and this other reason, and if I can buy this piece of equipment, let's say, I will reach my goal in a faster way. And they're like, yeah, okay, we can afford to buy it, do it. So, yeah, no, I think in general, I mean, well, my experience is just my experience, but I've never really heard of someone like, I couldn't complete my project because we didn't have the money to buy stuff. So.
There's a degree of quality control that we make sure people don't hire people to do jobs that you then can't do. So I think it's not an issue for most students.
Yeah, as you say, it depends on the subject. For example, I do a lot of programming, so as long as I have a computer, I can work, which is provided free by the university. So yeah, I think these packages, we have like a budget. Every student has a certain budget that you can use for your, well, for whatever you want, kind of. As Angela said, you have to defend your option. What I have been doing is I start taking trainings. So I choose a training, I go for it, I pay with the university budget. Again, this training has to help me to do my research better. That's like the backup of it. I don't think that's something that will limit your experience or your project. So you should be fine.
I think we can even be concrete for this audience, can't we? So one of the great things that our dean did, in fact, was that all of our PhD students in physical science get £1,200 a year to spend on this sort of activities, conferences, books, equipment, and so on.
Is that an answer to your question? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So before we all dive into pizza and wraps and all that food, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. So if you have any more questions to the panel, the details are all on the handout. There's also some project available as well. There's more information. I'm sure they can drop you an email. Just drop them an email. I'm sure they will reply. If you have any questions. One thing when it comes to PhDs, you know, for your undergrads, you have specific deadlines where you need to apply for. I think that's true for all the schools. There's no specific deadline. So if you, for example, think, oh, I want to start at a specific day, which is just not fitting, there's no deadlines as such for applying. There are rough guidelines, well, most of the people start, but generally you can start more or less any time. And because we have a lot of second year undergrads here as well, there are some opportunities to do a summer project within the different schools, and that gives you a little bit of a hands-on experience to find out, is practical research something for me? Do I like to stay in academia? Do I, you know, how's working then in everyday life? And these are all the questions that you can ask the PhD students who are in the audience here. You can ask a panel as well, because I hope they will stick around for a little bit, having a beer or pizza. And yeah, so that was the end of the event. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for the